Hey guys, tonight we are going to embark on a journey that promises to be, well, less of an edge-of-your-seat thriller and more of a gentle, persistent lullaby. We're not scaling mountains or uncovering forgotten gold. Instead, we're going to follow the surprisingly slow, almost comatose existence of something incredibly humble. Something you might just have your head resting on right now, a cotton pillow. Specifically, one that eventually found its way, through countless tedious steps, into the hushed, opulent, and frankly, probably quite boring chambers of the Ottoman court. Yes, we're tracking a pillow. From the dusty field where its fibers grew, through noisy markets and quiet workshops, into the labyrinthine passages of a grand palace. It's a tale so devoid of sudden twists or dramatic turns, you probably won't survive the first 15 minutes conscious. It's the kind of history that unfolds at the pace of drying paint, perfect for drifting off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see our little community scattered across the sleepy world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story, or rather, the incredibly slow, meandering prologue to our story, begins not in the grand halls of Istanbul, but millennia before, in places far, far away. You have to understand, the cotton that would eventually fill our hypothetical pillow didn't just pop into existence in the Ottoman Empire. Oh no! Its history stretches back so far that trying to pinpoint the absolute first moment humans decided this fluffy white stuff was useful feels a bit like trying to find the exact second you started feeling sleepy tonight. It just sort of crept up on you. We're talking about civilizations lost to the mists of time, people who looked at a plant bursting with these soft, slightly sticky fibers and thought, I bet I could spin that into something. And spin they did. One of the earliest undisputed centers of cotton cultivation and use is the Indus Valley Civilization, way back around 3000 BCE. Imagine people living along that great river system, long before anyone in Anatolia was even thinking about founding an empire, already expertly growing cotton plants. They figured out how to process those fluffy bolls, separating the fiber from the seeds. A surprisingly tedious job you'll be relieved you don't have to do by hand tonight, and spin it into thread. And they didn't just make rough sackcloth. Archaeological finds include fragments of finely woven cotton fabric, suggesting a sophistication that honestly feels a bit rude for people living that long ago. It's like finding out your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents had better Wi-Fi than you do. Mainstream historical fact number 1. The Indus Valley Civilization was a major hub for early cotton textile production. They even traded it. Yes, cotton was already a global commodity, albeit on a much slower, camel-powered scale. But the Indus Valley wasn't the only place cotton was making friends with humanity. Across the world, in what is now Peru, people were independently domesticating their own species of cotton plant, Gossypium barbadense, around the same time or perhaps even earlier. Isn't that neat? Two completely separate parts of the world, thousands of miles apart, both looking at fluffy seed pods and having the same brilliant idea. Historians still argue whether cotton domestication in the Americas actually preceded the Old World, or if they happened concurrently. It's a debate that rages in very quiet, dusty academic circles, probably fueled by weak tea and stale biscuits. The point is, cotton wasn't a single invention, it was a parallel discovery, a testament to human ingenuity, or perhaps just the sheer obviousness of, hey, this fluff looks spinnable. Think about the sheer effort involved back then. No cotton gins, obviously. Each boll had to be picked by hand. Then, you'd sit there, painstakingly pulling the fibers away from those annoyingly clingy seeds. It wasn't glamorous work. It was slow, repetitive, fingers getting sore kind of work. Imagine doing that all day, just to get enough fiber to maybe weave a small square of cloth. It makes you appreciate your modern, factory-spun, perfectly even cotton sheets, doesn't it? This ancient cotton wasn't always the brilliant white stuff you see today either. Early varieties could be naturally brown or even green. Imagine a world where beige or pale green cotton was the norm. It certainly takes some of the drama out of laundry sorting. That's our quirky tidbit. Early cottons weren't always white, some were naturally colored. Probably saved a fortune on dye, which was another whole tedious process involving snails or plants. So, before a cotton fiber ever dreams of patting a sultan's head, it has this long, ancient pedigree. It's been picked in sunny fields along forgotten rivers, had its seeds painstakingly removed by hand, been teased and spun into thread using simple drop spindles or early spinning wheels, and woven on basic looms. It traveled, too. From India, cotton textiles and the knowledge of how to grow and process the plant slowly spread westward through Persia and eventually towards the Mediterranean world. From Peru, it stayed in the Americas for a long time before Columbus decided to, mess everything up. But our story's cotton is an old-world traveler. It followed the rhythms of trade, moving in caravans alongside spices and silks, carried by merchants who probably complained just as much about the road conditions and the price fluctuations as merchants do today. They just did it while riding a camel instead of checking a stock app. This slow diffusion of a useful plant and its associated technology is a recurring theme in history, and honestly, it's a bit like watching paint dry, but over centuries. Useful, but not exactly thrilling. We're laying the groundwork here, the deep, deep foundation of our pillow's existence. It didn't just start in the Ottoman era, it inherited a legacy of thousands of years of human interaction with this particular plant. A legacy of dusty fields, sun-baked hands, the rhythmic click-clack of early looms, and the quiet hum of manual spinning. A history of patience, persistence, and a lot of repetitive motion. Perfect, really, for helping you drift off. So, we've established that cotton has been around the block a few times before the Ottomans even thought about setting up shop. Now, let's get our hands metaphorically dirty and actually look at how this stuff was produced, long before industrial machinery turned it into an anonymous, mass-produced commodity. Imagine you're standing in a field, maybe somewhere in ancient Persia or Egypt, under a hot, dry sun. The plants are knee-high, maybe waist-high, covered in green leaves and those distinctive white or cream-colored flowers that eventually turn into the cotton bolls. This wasn't like growing wheat or barley, where you just scatter seeds and hope for rain. Cotton needed a bit more coaxing, a bit more care. The cycle typically began in the spring. Farmers would prepare the soil, often by plowing with oxen or simple hand tools. Then came the planting. Cotton seeds are relatively small, and you dibble them into the soil, one by one, or maybe a few at a time, hoping they germinate. This wasn't broadcast seeding, it was a more deliberate process. Once the seedlings emerged, they needed tending. Weeds were a constant battle, pulled by hand under the hot sun. In drier climates, irrigation was crucial. Mainstream historical fact number 2, ancient civilizations in arid regions like Mesopotamia and Egypt developed sophisticated irrigation techniques, some of which were absolutely essential for growing crops like cotton far from natural waterways. They dug canals, built shadufs, those counterbalanced poles for lifting water, and basically engineered ways to bring water to the thirsty plants. It required community effort, coordination, and probably a lot of arguments about whose turn it was to maintain the ditch. As the plants grew, they'd flower, and then those flowers would mature into hard, green capsules, the cotton bolls. Inside, the fibers and seeds were developing. As the bolls ripened, they would crack open, revealing that fluffy white, or sometimes colored, fibers spilling out. This was the signal, harvest time. And this is where the real work began. Cotton harvest was, and remained for millennia, a back-breaking, hand-stinging affair. You had to walk the rows, bending down to pick the right bolls, being careful not to damage the plant or get pricked by any sharp bits. A good picker could gather a decent amount in a day, but it was relentless, repetitive work under the sun. You couldn't just clear-cut the field. Bolls ripened at different rates, so you had to go back through the field multiple times over several weeks as more bolls burst open. It was like the world's least exciting scavenger hunt. Oh look, another boll! Just like the last 50 I picked today. Once harvested, the bolls weren't ready to be spun. The fibers were still clinging tightly to the cotton seeds. This is perhaps the most tedious step, ginning. In the ancient world, ginning was done almost entirely by hand. You'd literally sit there and pull the fiber away from each seed. Imagine the patience required. Some early simple tools might have been used, like a flat stone and a roller, but it was still incredibly inefficient compared to, say, shelling peas. This manual ginning process was a massive bottleneck in cotton production for thousands of years. It limited how much fiber any single person could process, which in turn limited how much cotton could be grown and used. That's our quirky tidbit. The manual separation of cotton fiber from seeds was such a bottleneck that for millennia, textile production couldn't scale up significantly, keeping cotton goods relatively precious compared to, say, linen or wool in some regions. Eventually, slightly more advanced tools emerged. The churka, a simple roller gin, appeared in India perhaps as early as the first millennium CE. It was essentially two rollers, often made of wood, through which you fed the cotton bolls. The rollers would grip the fiber and pull it through, while the larger seeds were too big to pass and would be separated. This was an improvement over pure hand picking, but it was still slow and required constant feeding and manual power, often turned by a crank. It was the Roomba of ancient cotton processing, a bit clunky, prone to jams, but better than doing it yourself. Historians still argue whether the roller gin was invented independently in different places or diffused from a single origin point in India. It's another one of those quiet scholarly debates, probably involving footnotes and sternly worded letters to journal editors. After ginning, the fiber still wasn't perfectly clean. There might be bits of leaf, stem, or dirt mixed in. So, the next step was cleaning and fluffing. This might involve beating the cotton with sticks or bows to loosen the fibers and knock out debris. Picture someone hitting a pile of cotton with a stick. Not exactly high-tech, is it? This process also helped to align the fibers somewhat, making them easier to spin. The goal was to get a relatively clean, airy mass of fiber ready for the spinning wheels, or, more likely in the early days, the drop spindle. Once you had a pile of clean, fluffy fiber, it was time to package it up. Cotton is bulky. A small amount of fiber takes up a lot of space. For storage or transport, it needed to be compressed. This is where baling came in. Before hydraulic presses and metal straps, baling was a manual affair. You'd likely pack the cotton tightly into large sacks or bundles, pressing it down with your feet or using simple levers to compress it as much as possible. These hand-packed bales wouldn't be as dense or uniform as modern ones, but they made the cotton easier to handle, stack, and transport over long distances. Imagine jumping up and down on a big sack of cotton to compress it. It sounds kind of fun for about 5 minutes, right? And then you remember you have to do it for hours. So, by the time a batch of cotton fiber was ready to begin its long journey towards potentially becoming part of an Ottoman pillow, it had already been through quite an ordeal, planted, weeded, potentially irrigated, harvested boll by boll, painstakingly separated from seeds by hand or simple machine, cleaned, fluffed, and finally stumped or pressed into a bale. It was a product of immense human labor, patience, and frankly, a tolerance for mind-numbing repetition. This humble bale, likely wrapped in coarse fabric or woven mats and tied with rope, was the culmination of an entire agricultural season and countless hours of manual processing. It wasn't some abstract commodity yet. It was the tangible result of sun, soil, water, and persistent human effort. And from here, it would begin its travels, across land and sea, heading towards markets and eventually, perhaps, the workshops that supplied the vast and slow-moving machinery of the Ottoman court. It's a long way to go, and we've only just finished with the farming bit. Plenty of time left for you to get really, truly sleepy. Alright, we have our bale of cotton. It's been grown, picked, de-seeded with the ancient equivalent of tweezers and frustration, cleaned, fluffed, and packed down into a clumsy, oversized sack. Now comes the truly slow part for the cotton itself, the journey. Remember, our eventual pillow ends up in the Ottoman court, likely in Istanbul. But this bale of cotton might have started its life hundreds, maybe thousands of miles away. Cotton cultivation was widespread in the Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa long before the Ottoman Empire coalesced. So, our cotton could be coming from Egypt, Syria, Persia, or even further east. And getting from there to Anatolia and eventually to Istanbul involved traversing some of the most famous, or infamous, trade routes in history. Think Silk Road, but for cotton. While silk gets all the glamorous headlines and movie depictions, cotton was a massive bulk commodity moving along many of the same arteries. It wasn't lightweight and high value like silk or spices, it was bulky and valuable, but required moving significant volume to make a good profit. This meant caravans. Lots and lots of caravans. Imagine dozens, maybe hundreds of camels or mules, loaded down with goods, plodding slowly across vast distances. Our bale of cotton would be strapped onto the back of one of these patient beasts, starting a journey that could take months. The routes weren't just straight lines on a map. They twisted and turned, following rivers where possible, avoiding impassable mountains or dangerous deserts. They linked oases, towns, and major trading cities. From Egypt, cotton bales might travel along the North African coast or up the Nile before heading east across Sinai or by sea. From Syria or Mesopotamia, routes snaked across the desert towards Anatolia or up through the Levant to Mediterranean ports. From Persia and Central Asia, the paths were even longer, crossing high plateaus and vast plains before reaching the eastern borders of what would become the Ottoman Empire. Mainstream historical fact number 3. The network of trade routes known collectively as the Silk Road wasn't just for silk, it facilitated the movement of numerous goods, including cotton, textiles, spices, ideas, and technologies across Eurasia for centuries. Cotton was a staple cargo, less talked about than exotic silks but arguably more fundamental to the everyday lives of more people. The journey itself was fraught with peril, but not usually the exciting kind. Forget swashbuckling bandits every 5 miles, though they did exist, and added an unwelcome element of drama. The more common dangers were much more mundane, and much slower: harsh weather, scarce water, illness spreading through the caravan members or animals, and just the sheer physical toll of endless travel. A sandstorm could halt progress for days. A lame camel could slow the entire group down. Getting sick in the middle of nowhere was a serious problem. It was a test of endurance, for the merchants, the guards, and yes, even the bale of cotton, which was subjected to sun, dust, and rain. It probably got a little dirty, a little compressed, maybe nibbled on by a particularly determined desert rodent. Along these routes were caravanserai, roadside inns built to shelter travelers and their animals. These were like ancient truck stops, offering a secure place to rest, replenish supplies, and maybe trade gossip with merchants heading in the opposite direction. Our cotton bale would spend many nights in the courtyard of a caravanserai, stacked with other goods, while the humans haggled over prices and exchanged news from distant lands. It's here that the bale might change hands, sold by one merchant to another who would carry it the next leg of the journey. The supply chain was often fragmented, not a single entity moving the cotton from field to final user, but a series of transactions, each adding a little cost, a little delay. Transport wasn't limited to land. Once the cotton reached the Mediterranean or Black Sea coasts, it could be loaded onto ships. Ancient and medieval shipping wasn't exactly speedy. These were sailing vessels, dependent on wind and weather. A journey by sea could be faster than land travel over vast distances, but it came with its own risks: storms, pirates, actual pirates, not just guys who download movies illegally, and the ever-present danger of running aground or capsizing. Our cotton bale, now likely sharing space with barrels of olive oil, sacks of grain, and maybe some unfortunate livestock, would endure the rocking motion of the waves, the smell of salt spray and bilge water, and the constant creaking of the ship's timbers. It would be stacked below deck, probably in dim, poorly ventilated conditions. Not exactly five-star travel for a bundle of fluff. The people involved in this trade were a diverse lot. Arabs, Persians, Syrians, Greeks, Italians, Armenians, merchants from many different backgrounds and religions participated in this vast network. They spoke different languages, used different currencies, and operated under different legal customs, but they were all connected by the shared goal of moving goods and making a profit. They navigated a complex world of shifting political borders and occasional conflicts. A route that was safe one year might be perilous the next. Historians still argue whether specific stretches of these trade routes were controlled by particular groups or if access was generally open to anyone willing to pay the tolls and taxes. It's a nuanced debate about economic history and political control along major arteries of commerce. This long, slow journey wasn't just about moving cotton, it was about connection. It facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices alongside the physical goods. The roller gin, perhaps developed in India, might have slowly made its way westward along with the cotton bales. New weaving techniques or dyeing methods could spread from one region to another. Even diseases, our quirky tidbit, traveled along these routes. The Black Death, for instance, followed trade paths across Asia and into Europe, a grim reminder that not all exchanges on the Silk Road were beneficial. So, our innocent-looking cotton bale, enduring its slow, dusty, or sea-spray transit, was a silent participant in this massive, slow-motion cultural and biological exchange. It wasn't just fiber, it was a carrier of history, waiting patiently on the back of a camel or in the hold of a ship to reach its destination, wherever that might be. And eventually, that destination would bring it closer to the world of the Ottomans. So, after its incredibly slow, potentially dusty, or sea-sickening journey across vast distances, our bale of cotton finally reaches the doorstep of the Ottoman world. Let's imagine it arriving at a major port city in Anatolia, maybe Izmir or Bursa, or even making its way directly to Istanbul's bustling harbors. This wasn't just a simple delivery, it was entering a complex system of regulations, taxes, and established commercial practices. The Ottoman Empire, even in its earlier stages, was a major player in regional trade, and it had developed sophisticated mechanisms for managing the flow of goods. As the ship docked or the caravan arrived, the first step was interacting with the Ottoman authorities. This meant customs. The empire levied duties on imports and exports, and cotton was no exception. Officials, probably scribes with impressive mustaches and even more impressive ledgers, would inspect the cargo. They'd assess its quantity and quality to determine the appropriate tax. This wasn't always a smooth process. There could be haggling over the value of the cotton, disputes about its origin, or attempts to, shall we say, influence the assessment. A merchant arriving with a valuable cargo like cotton needed to be prepared to navigate this bureaucratic and sometimes corrupt landscape. Mainstream historical fact number 4. The Ottoman Empire relied heavily on customs duties and taxes on trade as a significant source of state revenue. Major port cities and border crossings were key economic hubs because of this taxation system. Our bale of cotton, still bundled and probably looking worse for wear after its travels, would be offloaded. Imagine porters, strong backs straining, carrying the heavy bales from the ship's hold or off the backs of camels. The air would be thick with the smells of the port, salt, fish, spices, animal dung, and the general odor of human activity. The sounds would be overwhelming, shouts in multiple languages, the bleating of animals, the creaking of carts, the rhythmic hammering from nearby workshops. Our cotton bale, silent and unassuming, would be just one small part of this chaotic, vibrant scene. Once cleared through customs and taxes paid, or promised, the cotton needed to find a buyer. It would likely be moved to a khan or a market area dedicated to bulk goods. Khans were essentially large inns with courtyards, serving as warehouses, accommodation for merchants, and places for conducting business. Imagine our bale sitting in a courtyard, exposed to the elements but relatively secure, waiting. Merchants, representing weavers, textile workshops, or larger dealers, would circulate, inspecting the goods. They'd open a bale, pull out a handful of fiber, examine its color, staple length, how long the individual fibers are, cleanliness, and feel. They were assessing the quality because that directly impacted the price and what kind of fabric could be made from it. Not all cotton was created equal, just like not all coffee beans are the same. The negotiations would begin. This was a process of offer and counteroffer, conducted with a mix of formal courtesy and sharp haggling. The price of cotton fluctuated based on supply, demand, quality, and political stability along the trade routes. A merchant who had successfully brought a large quantity of high-quality cotton through a difficult journey could command a good price. Conversely, a glut of cotton in the market could depress prices. Our silent bale witnessed these exchanges, its fate decided by men in long robes debating in languages it couldn't understand. It was a passive commodity in a very active marketplace. This arrival in Ottoman territory wasn't just about economics, it was about culture and technology too. The Ottomans inherited and built upon existing textile traditions in Anatolia, which had already been influenced by centuries of interaction with the East and the Mediterranean. Cotton weaving was already established, but the influx of cotton from new sources, and potentially new processing techniques that traveled with it, could influence local practices. A quirky tidbit here, Ottoman Istanbul, like many major pre-industrial cities, had specific districts or khans dedicated to particular trades. There would be areas for silk merchants, spice dealers, and certainly areas where bulk goods like cotton were bought and sold. You wouldn't find a cotton dealer setting up shop just anywhere. They were part of a specific commercial ecosystem. This spatial organization helped regulate trade but also concentrated the smells and sounds of certain industries. Imagine a whole street dedicated to processing wool, for example. The buyer of our bale might be an independent weaver, a master craftsman with a small workshop, or perhaps an agent for a larger establishment, like a supplier to the palace or a wealthy household. For our story, let's assume our cotton is bought by someone who intends for it to end up as padding. This buyer would need to transport the bale from the market to their workshop or storage facility. This might involve loading it onto a cart pulled by oxen or donkeys, or even carrying it through the crowded streets on their shoulders if the distance wasn't too great and the bale wasn't enormous. Imagine the visual, a large, bulky cotton bale bobbing its way through the narrow, winding streets of an Ottoman city, dodging pedestrians, stray animals, and maybe even a runaway cart. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman state actively managed the cotton trade beyond taxation, perhaps through monopolies or price controls, or if it largely allowed private merchants to operate freely. There were certainly regulations regarding quality standards and market practices, but the extent of direct state intervention in the bulk commodity trade is a subject of ongoing research. Was the cotton trade purely driven by supply and demand filtered through merchant networks, or was there a guiding hand from the Sublime Porte? A debate that keeps a few historians awake at night, a feeling you're probably becoming familiar with as we delve into this. So, our bale has navigated customs, survived the port chaos, endured market negotiations, and been purchased. It's left the anonymous mass of the marketplace and is now heading towards a specific destination, a workshop where it will be transformed from raw fiber into something recognizable, something soft and yielding, something destined for the interior of a pillow. It's made it through the wild journey, and now it's entering the more ordered, but still labor-intensive, world of crafting within the Ottoman realm. The noise of the port fades, replaced by the sounds of the city, and the promise of further, equally slow, transformations. Our cotton bale, having survived the long journey and the bustling port markets, is now nestled in a workshop. It's no longer just raw fiber, it's someone's purchase, destined for a specific purpose. In our case, that purpose is the stuffing for a pillow casing, which means this particular batch of cotton doesn't need to be spun into superfine thread for delicate fabric. It needs to be processed into a fluffy, resilient filling. But before it gets there, the casing itself needs to be made. And that requires turning cotton fiber into plain, sturdy cloth. So, even though our cotton bale is destined for filling, some other bales, perhaps from the same shipment or acquired similarly, are headed for the spinning and weaving stages. Let's divert our attention for a moment to follow that process, because it's essential for creating the vessel that will hold our filling cotton. The journey from fiber to fabric is another one of those ancient, labor-intensive processes that makes you marvel at the sheer patience of pre-industrial people. First, the cotton fiber from the bale needs to be prepared for spinning. Remember how it was compressed and maybe a bit dirty? It needs to be cleaned further and loosened up. This is often done through beating or fluffing, similar to the final steps before baling, but perhaps more refined. Workers would use sticks or mallets to beat the cotton, removing any remaining seeds, leaf fragments, or dirt. This also helps to open up the fibers and make them airy. Sometimes, a process called carding would be used. Carding involves using two brushes or paddles with teeth, like giant pet brushes, to comb the cotton fibers, aligning them parallel to each other. This process is crucial for creating smooth, strong yarn. Imagine sitting there, painstakingly combing handfuls of cotton fluff over and over again. Your shoulders would ache just thinking about it. Once cleaned and carded, or at least fluffed, the cotton is ready to be spun into thread. This is where the magic, such as it is, happens. Historically, spinning was done using either a drop spindle or a spinning wheel. The drop spindle is incredibly ancient, basically a weight, the spindle, attached to a hook. You'd attach a bit of fiber, give the spindle a twist, and let it hang and rotate, drawing out the fiber and twisting it into thread as it dropped. It required skill and coordination to feed the fibers smoothly and maintain an even tension. The spinning wheel, a later invention, though still ancient by our standards, probably arriving in the Middle East from India around the 11th or 12th century, mechanized the process slightly, using a wheel turned by hand or foot to rotate the spindle. This allowed for faster spinning and potentially finer, more consistent thread. Mainstream historical fact number 5. The introduction and adoption of the spinning will significantly increase the speed and efficiency of thread production compared to hand spinning with a drop spindle. Spinning cotton, especially by hand, is trickier than spinning wool or linen because the fibers are shorter and have a different texture. It requires a delicate touch. Imagine the hours spent spinning. A skilled spinner could produce a certain amount of thread per day, but it was a slow, continuous process. The thread also needed to be relatively strong and even for weaving the pillow casing. It didn't need to be gossamer fine, like for a delicate dress, but it couldn't be full of thick and thin spots. This required concentration and practice. After spinning, the thread might be wound onto bobbins or spools. It was then ready for weaving. Weaving involved setting up a loom. Looms in the Ottoman period ranged from simple backstrap looms, where one end is attached to the weaver's body and the other to a fixed point, to more complex horizontal or vertical frame looms. The principle is the same. You create a set of parallel threads running lengthwise, the warp, and then interlace another thread, the weft, horizontally using a shuttle. Imagine the rhythmic throw and catch of the shuttle, the beat of the heddle, the part that lifts the warp threads, as it separates the threads, and the thud of the reed as it pushes the weft thread tightly into place. For a simple pillow casing, the fabric would likely be a plain weave, the simplest pattern, where each weft thread goes over one warp thread and under the next, alternating row by row. This creates a sturdy, durable cloth. The width of the fabric was limited by the size of the loom. If the loom was narrower than the required width for the pillow casing, multiple strips of fabric would need to be sewn together later. The fabric for a pillow casing didn't need elaborate patterns or bright dyes. It needed to be strong and hold up to being stuffed and used. It was the textile equivalent of plain brown paper, functional and unassuming. Our quirky tidbit for this stage: in Ottoman cities, textile production was often highly organized, with different groups of artisans specializing in different parts of the process or different types of textiles. There might be guilds of spinners, weavers, dyers, and finishers. This organization helped maintain quality standards and regulate the trade, but it also meant that the journey from raw cotton to finished cloth involved moving the material between different workshops and sets of hands, each adding their layer of labor and cost. Historians still argue about the relative economic importance of cotton, wool, and silk production within the Ottoman Empire. While silk was the luxury good often associated with the court, cotton textiles were more widely used by the general population for clothing, furnishings, and yes, pillows. Was cotton production primarily for domestic use, or was it a significant export commodity? The answer likely varied by region and time period, but the sheer volume of cotton required for everyday items suggests its fundamental importance to the Ottoman economy and daily life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. So, while the cotton destined for our pillow stuffing waited patiently, other cotton fibers were being transformed through the meticulous, rhythmic processes of spinning and weaving. These anonymous threads and lengths of plain cloth were the necessary precursors to the pillow itself. Without this fundamental textile production, there would be no casing to hold the fluff. It's another layer of slow, painstaking work underpinning the existence of our simple object, a testament to the interconnectedness of different crafts and the persistent effort required to turn a natural fiber into something useful in the pre-industrial world. The sound of the loom, the gentle whir of the spinning wheel, these were the background noises of this part of our pillow's journey, quiet, persistent, and hopefully, quite soothing. Now that we've considered the journey of other cotton fibers being spun and woven into plain cloth, let's return to our specific bale of cotton, the one destined to be stuffing. It's been purchased and moved to a workshop. But before it can become the fluffy interior of a pillow, someone needs to create the bag, the skin, the casing that will hold it all together. And that casing, as we just explored, is made from plain woven cotton fabric, produced through all those steps of spinning and weaving. Imagine the scene in the workshop. Rolls or stacks of the plain cotton cloth are present. This fabric, likely unbleached and undyed, perhaps a natural off-white or cream color, is the raw material for the pillow form. It needs to be cut and sewn. This work was done by hand, with scissors or knives for cutting and needles and thread for stitching. The thread used for sewing the casing would also be cotton, spun slightly stronger than the thread for the fabric itself, perhaps. The process sounds simple. Cut out 2 rectangles or squares of fabric and sew them together on 3 sides, leaving one side open for stuffing. But hand sewing, especially for something that needs to be durable like a pillow casing, is more involved than just a quick running stitch. The seams needed to be strong enough to hold the weight of the stuffing and withstand the friction and pressure of use. A common stitch for this kind of work would be a backstitch or a felling stitch, which creates a secure, overlapping seam. It's slow, repetitive work, requiring a steady hand and good eyesight, often done in natural light near a window, or by lamplight which wasn't great for visibility. Think about the tools. Simple metal needles, often made of iron or steel. Cotton thread, perhaps waxed slightly to make it stronger and easier to pull through the fabric. Scissors, which in earlier times might have been large and a bit unwieldy compared to modern ones. The tailor or seamstress would measure the fabric, mark the cutting lines, and carefully cut out the shapes. The dimensions would depend on the desired size of the pillow, which in turn might depend on where it was intended to be used. A large floor cushion, a smaller sleeping pillow, a decorative bolster, each would require a different amount of fabric and a different shape. Our quirky tidbit for this stage: professional tailors or seamstresses in the Ottoman period often worked in specific areas or markets, just like other artisans. There might be a street or a section of the bazaar known for cloth merchants and tailors. However, simpler sewing work like making basic pillow casings could also be done by women within households, either for their own use or perhaps as piecework for a merchant who provided the fabric. It's possible our pillow casing was stitched in a busy family home, amidst the sounds of daily life, or in a quieter corner of a professional workshop. Once the pieces were cut, the sewing would begin. The rhythmic push and pull of the needle, the small, precise movements of the fingers guiding the fabric and the thread. It required patience and skill to keep the stitches even and the seam straight. Imagine the quiet focus of the person doing this work. It's not exciting, it's just the steady progress of needle and thread, joining two pieces of cloth to form a simple bag. The seams would be turned inwards, perhaps, to prevent fraying and create a neat finish. This also added strength. Mainstream historical fact number 6: hand sewing was the only method of stitching fabric until the invention of the sewing machine in the 19th century. Everything from the simplest seam to the most complex garment was stitched by hand, highlighting the immense labor involved in creating textiles and clothing throughout history. So, the creation of our pillow casing, no matter how plain, represents a significant amount of manual work. Historians still argue whether the quality and types of textiles used for basic items like pillow casings within the Ottoman court differed significantly based on the intended recipient's status. Would a sultan's pillow casing be made from slightly finer cotton or stitched with greater care than one for a lesser official? Logic suggests yes, but pinpointing specific differences in simple utility items through historical records can be challenging. Evidence is often richer for elaborate, decorative items, while the mundane details of everyday objects are less frequently documented. As the sewing progressed, the simple bag shape would emerge. 3 sides stitched, 1 left open. The corners would be carefully finished. The thread ends would be secured with knots. The resulting casing was just a floppy, empty sack of cloth. It wasn't a pillow yet. It was just a container, waiting to be filled. It had no shape, no form, no resilience. It was like an empty balloon, waiting for air. But its creation was a crucial step. It provided the necessary boundary, the structure, however basic, that would turn a pile of fluffy fiber into a functional cushion. This stage represents the transition from raw material to a crafted object, albeit one of minimal complexity. It's the point where the journey of the cotton fibers intersects with the skills of a textile worker. The anonymous bale of fluff is now destined for a specific, handmade container. This plain casing, sitting in the workshop, is quietly anticipating the next step, being filled. It has no idea it might end up in a palace, supporting the head of someone important, or maybe just a palace cat. It's just a fabric bag, waiting. And this quiet, waiting fabric bag is perfect for conjuring sleepy images, isn't it? The rhythmic pull of the needle, the soft folds of the plain cloth, all part of the incredibly slow story. Okay, we have our plain cotton pillow casing, a simple fabric bag with 1 side left open. It's been cut and carefully stitched by hand. Now, finally, the cotton that has been on this long, slow journey, grown in a field, harvested, processed, baled, transported, bought, and delivered to the workshop, gets to fulfill its destiny. It's time to become the stuffing. The cotton fiber intended for stuffing is different from the fiber used for thread. It doesn't need to be spun into a strong, continuous strand. Instead, it needs to be relatively clean, well fluffed, and free of tangles or hard bits. It also needs to be abundant. Stuffing a pillow takes a surprising amount of cotton to make it plump and supportive, not just a sad, floppy sack. The process of preparing the stuffing cotton likely involved additional cleaning and fluffing. Remember the batting or beating we talked about? This would be done thoroughly to ensure the cotton was airy and lump-free. Sometimes, a bow-like tool was used, struck with a mallet, to vibrate and loosen the fibers. Imagine the gentle thrumming sound of a cotton bow in a workshop. This was a common method for preparing cotton or wool for stuffing mattresses, quilts, and, of course, pillows. It helped remove any lingering impurities and made the cotton light and fluffy. Once the cotton was sufficiently prepared, clean, airy, and piled high, it was time to fill the casing. This was a manual process, requiring someone to take handfuls of the prepared cotton and carefully push and pack them into the open side of the fabric bag. The goal was to fill the casing evenly, avoiding lumps or hollows, to create a consistently soft and supportive pillow. Imagine the person doing this, their hands full of soft, fluffy cotton, pushing it into the opening, trying to distribute it smoothly into the corners. It's a simple task, but one that requires a knack for getting the tension just right, not too loose, not too tight and hard. As the cotton was packed in, the empty fabric bag would gradually transform, gaining volume, shape, and weight. It would start to look like an actual pillow. The person stuffing would periodically knead and shape the pillow, feeling for uneven spots and adding more cotton where needed. It was a tactile process, relying on feel rather than precise measurement. How much cotton went into a pillow would depend on its size and the desired firmness. There wasn't a standardized pillow density index back then. Some people preferred firm pillows, others soft. Mainstream historical fact number 7, pillows and cushions were widely used in the Ottoman Empire, not just for sleeping but also as seating. Floor cushions were common, backrests, and decorative items. This meant there was a constant demand for stuffing materials like cotton, wool, or even feathers, and consequently, a need for people to perform the labor of preparing the stuffing and filling the casings. The ubiquitous nature of cushions in Ottoman life meant pillow making wasn't a niche craft. It was an essential part of furnishing homes, public spaces, and certainly the palace. Once the casing was filled to the desired plumpness, the open side needed to be closed. This was done by hand, with needle and thread. The seamstress would carefully fold in the raw edges of the opening and stitch it shut, often using a strong slip stitch or whip stitch to create a neat, durable closure that wouldn't easily come undone, even with the pressure of the stuffing. This final seam was the last step in turning the separate components, the fabric casing and the cotton stuffing, into a finished pillow. Our quirky tidbit for this stage: while cotton was a common stuffing material, pillows in the Ottoman world could also be filled with other things depending on availability and desired quality, including wool, straw, or even down and feathers for more luxurious items. So, while our pillow is cotton, others might have had a slightly different, perhaps pricklier or softer, interior life. Imagine the tactile difference between a straw-filled cushion and a cotton one. Historians still argue about the exact composition of everyday items like pillows and cushions used within different social strata of Ottoman society. While we have records of luxurious silk coverings and embroidered cushions for the elite, documentation on the stuffing materials and basic casings for more common pillows is sparser. Was cotton stuffing primarily for the middle ranks, with straw for the poor and feathers for the rich? Or was cotton more universally used due to its relative availability and ease of processing compared to, say, cleaning and preparing feathers? It's another area where the details of daily life are harder to pin down precisely. Our pillow, now complete, sat in the workshop. It had gained form and substance. It was soft and yielding, a tangible object ready for use. It was no longer just a pile of fiber or a fabric bag. It was a pillow. It might have been lightly beaten or plumped one last time to ensure its shape was good. It looked simple, maybe a bit lumpy compared to modern, perfectly uniform pillows, but it was the product of a long chain of labor and transport. It was ready to leave the workshop and enter the world, a world that, for our specific pillow, would eventually lead it to the closed, hierarchical society of the Ottoman palace. It had made it through the fundamental creation phase. The next step was entering the distribution system, and for a palace pillow, that meant a very specific, very slow path. So, our pillow is finished. It's a simple cotton cushion, hand-stitched, filled with fluffy cotton batting. It sits in the workshop, perhaps stacked with other similar pillows, waiting. Its ultimate destination, in our story, is the Ottoman palace, the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, let's say, a sprawling complex that was less like a single building and more like a small, walled city with numerous courtyards, pavilions, and living quarters. Getting something as mundane as a pillow into the palace wasn't like popping down to the local Bed Bath & Beyond. It involved a specific, formal process of procurement and delivery. The palace had immense needs. It housed thousands of people, the Sultan, his family, concubines, eunuchs, viziers, guards, scribes, servants of every imaginable description, and countless support staff. All these people needed food, clothing, shelter, and furnishings. There was a dedicated palace administration responsible for acquiring everything from exotic spices and precious jewels to everyday necessities like textiles and pillows. This administration operated through a system of official suppliers, contracts, and deliveries. Our pillow likely wouldn't be bought directly from a small independent workshop. Instead, a larger merchant or supplier would fulfill an order placed by the palace. This supplier might contract with several workshops to produce the required number of pillows or acquire them from the market. The palace would issue a requisition, a formal request for a certain quantity of goods of a specified type and quality. This requisition would go to the appropriate department, perhaps the Treasury or the Imperial Household Department, which would then engage a supplier. The supplier would gather the ordered goods, including our pillow. Imagine our pillow being selected from a stack, maybe inspected briefly by the supplier or their agent to ensure it met basic standards. It would then be bundled with other pillows and possibly other textile goods, blankets, sheets, cushion covers, destined for the palace. These goods wouldn't just be tossed into a cart, they would be carefully itemized, packed, and prepared for official delivery. Security and accountability were paramount when dealing with palace supplies. The delivery itself would be formal. It wasn't a casual drop-off. The supplier, or their trusted representative, would transport the goods, likely by cart, to the palace gates. They would arrive at a designated entrance, probably one of the outer gates of Topkapi Palace, like the Imperial Gate, Babi Humayun. Here, they would be met by palace officials, guards, scribes, and administrators from the procurement department. Mainstream historical fact number 8, the Ottoman palace, particularly Topkapi, had a complex administrative structure with specialized departments responsible for different aspects of its operation, including treasury, supplies, kitchens, stables, and the harem. The procurement of goods was a formalized process to ensure quality, prevent theft, and maintain records. Our pillow was entering a highly regulated environment. The goods would be unloaded and subject to inspection. Officials would check the items against the requisition list, verifying quantities and ensuring the goods met the expected quality. Our pillow would be examined, perhaps felt for firmness, checked for obvious defects in stitching or fabric. This inspection was crucial. Supplying substandard goods to the palace was not a good way to stay in business, or keep your head, in more dramatic times. This is where our quirky tidbit comes in. Quality control in the palace was serious, sometimes even involving master artisans whose job was to inspect incoming goods like textiles or metalwork. They weren't just counting, they were assessing craftsmanship and material quality. Imagine a stern-faced official giving our humble pillow a critical squeeze. Once inspected and accepted, the goods would be officially received and recorded. Scribes would painstakingly note the delivery in ledgers, detailing the type and quantity of goods, the supplier, and the date. This documentation was essential for the palace administration and for settling accounts with the supplier. This is also where historians still argue about the extent of corruption or favoritism in the palace procurement system. While formal rules existed, were they always followed? Were certain suppliers favored? Were bribes exchanged to overlook minor quality issues? It's likely that, like any large bureaucracy, the reality was complex and involved a mix of formal procedure and informal influence. After being officially received and recorded, our pillow, along with the other delivered items, would be moved into the palace's internal storage system. It wouldn't immediately be placed on a bed or a divan. It would be taken to a storeroom, likely managed by a specific section of the household staff responsible for linens, bedding, and other textile furnishings. These storerooms were large, often located in less glamorous parts of the palace complex, and filled with stacks of textiles, blankets, rugs, and piles of pillows, all neatly, or perhaps not so neatly, organized awaiting distribution. So, our pillow, having completed its long journey from field to workshop and through the palace gates, now finds itself in palace storage. It's just one among many. It has no special markings, unless specified in the order, which is unlikely for a basic pillow, no unique features distinguishing it from hundreds or thousands of others like it. It's anonymous again, waiting in the dim light of a storeroom, possibly smelling faintly of dust and stored fabric, for its next assignment. Its journey wasn't over, it had just entered a new, internal phase within the slow-moving, hierarchical world of the Ottoman court. And this waiting period is perfect for a bit of quiet reflection, perhaps enough to finally send you drifting off. Our pillow has successfully navigated the journey from distant fields, through workshops, and past the watchful eyes of palace customs officials. It has been officially accepted and recorded. Its current status, palace inventory. It now resides in a storeroom within the vast Topkapi complex. Imagine it there. Stacks of textiles surrounding it, rolls of fabric, folded blankets, piles of sheets. Our pillow is just one in a mountain of similar pillows, likely covered in protective cloths to keep off the dust and vermin. The air in these storerooms would be still, dry, and cool, preserving the textiles. There might be the faint scent of camphor or other herbal deterrents used to keep moths and insects at bay. This isn't a quick stopover. Palace storerooms weren't like retail display shelves with high turnover. Goods were acquired based on anticipated needs or periodic orders, and they might sit in storage for considerable time before being allocated. Our pillow could be here for weeks, months, or even longer. It's a period of inanimate waiting, a quiet pause in its existence. It experiences nothing but the slow accumulation of dust, the occasional footsteps of staff entering or leaving the storeroom, and the subtle changes in temperature and humidity with the seasons. This waiting period is crucial for understanding the pace of life and logistics within the palace. Things didn't happen quickly. Supplies were managed methodically. A pillow wasn't issued the moment someone decided they needed one, it was drawn from existing stock. The staff managing the storerooms, likely eunuchs or other trusted household servants, would oversee the inventory, keeping track, or trying to keep track, of what was available and where it was stored. Imagine them consulting those ledgers we mentioned earlier, trying to match physical stock to written records. A tedious task, perfect for encouraging a yawn or two. Mainstream historical fact number 9. The Ottoman palace employed thousands of staff members responsible for maintaining the complex and serving its residents. A significant portion of this staff was dedicated to household management, including the storage, distribution, and maintenance of furnishings, clothing, and supplies. The sheer scale of the palace's needs required extensive storage facilities and a large workforce to manage them. During its time in storage, our pillow is an anonymous entity. It has no specific user, no assigned location beyond storeroom, section B, stack 7, or the Ottoman equivalent. It's just potential comfort, potential support, waiting for a decree, a request, an allocation. It's surrounded by other goods with their own stories, perhaps bolts of silk woven in Bursa, blankets from Anatolian shepherds, rugs from Persia. It's part of the palace's vast, material wealth, held in reserve. Our quirky tidbit for this stage: storerooms in grand historical buildings, including palaces, were sometimes surprisingly haphazard despite official attempts at organization. Over time, inventories could become inaccurate, items could be misplaced, or old goods might sit undisturbed for decades. It's possible our pillow wasn't in a perfectly organized museum-like archive, but in a slightly chaotic space, piled high with similar items, making it tricky to find a specific pillow if you ever needed to. Historians still argue about the efficiency and honesty of the Ottoman palace administration, particularly concerning the management of resources and supplies. Were goods distributed fairly based on need and status, or was there pilfering, waste, or favoritism in who received new or better items? While official procedures existed, the practical realities of managing such a large and complex household likely involved a degree of inefficiency and informal practices. Our pillow, sitting silently in storage, couldn't report on any of this, of course. The purpose of storage was to ensure that when items were needed, they were available. A request for bedding for a newly assigned chamber, replacing worn-out items, or furnishing a new pavilion would trigger an action. A member of the household staff responsible for furnishings would consult the inventory, or maybe just go look in the storeroom, and select the required number of items. This is when our pillow's passive waiting would end. It would be chosen, perhaps simply because it was at the top of a stack or the nearest to hand. Imagine the moment: a door creaks open, light spills into the dim storeroom, and hands reach into the pile. Our pillow is lifted, perhaps dusted off, and carried out. It's leaving the anonymity of the store and entering the active life of the palace. It's about to be assigned. Its destination won't be the Sultan's private chambers immediately, of course. Items of its basic nature would typically be distributed to the vast network of palace staff, guards, or lower-ranking officials first. This is where the pillow begins its practical journey within the palace walls, starting, most likely, at the lower levels of the hierarchy. This exit from storage is a small but significant moment. It moves from being potential to actual, from an anonymous unit of inventory to a specific item destined for use in a particular place by a particular person. It has spent its quiet time, gathering patience and perhaps a layer of dust. Now, it's ready to be put to work, ready to begin experiencing the slow, structured rhythms of palace life, starting from the bottom rung. Its anonymous waiting is over, and the next, slightly more active, but still very slow, phase of its existence is about to begin. Our pillow has left the quiet anonymity of the palace storeroom. It's been selected, presumably as part of a larger batch of furnishings being allocated. Where does a humble, plain cotton pillow go first in a place as hierarchical as the Ottoman palace? Not to the Sultan's divan, that's for sure. It starts lower down the ladder, in the chambers of the palace staff. Imagine our pillow being carried through less glamorous corridors of the palace, past service areas, kitchens, and barracks-like quarters. Its destination is likely one of the many rooms occupied by the thousands of individuals who kept the palace running: guards, porters, kitchen staff, stable hands, lower-ranking scribes, or general servants. These rooms were far from the opulent, tiled halls depicted in historical dramas. They were functional, often cramped, and shared by multiple people. Our pillow is placed on a simple bed, perhaps just a mattress on the floor or a low platform. This is its first taste of actual use after its long journey and waiting period. It's here that the pillow becomes part of someone's nightly routine. It's leaned on, slept on, maybe even sat on during the day if seating is scarce. It absorbs the sweat, the smells, and the wear and tear of daily use in a busy, not-so-clean environment. This isn't the pampered life of a decorative cushion. This is the working life of a utility item. Life in the servant quarters was dictated by the rigid schedule of the palace. Early mornings, late nights, long hours of demanding work. Our pillow, lying on the bed, witnesses the rhythms of these lives. The rustle of rough woolen or cotton clothing, the quiet murmurs of tired conversations at the end of the day, the sounds of sleep, the hurried movements before dawn. It's a world away from the stately processions or diplomatic meetings happening elsewhere in the palace. This is the engine room, the functional core. Mainstream historical fact number 10. The vast majority of people living and working within the Ottoman palace walls were not members of the imperial family or high-ranking officials, but a massive support staff performing countless tasks necessary for the palace's operation. Their living conditions, while secure and often providing regular meals, were generally modest compared to the luxury enjoyed by the elite. Our pillow is serving the crucial function of providing basic comfort to one of these essential individuals. The pillow in the servant quarters would likely lead a hard life. It would be subjected to significant use, maybe not always treated gently. It might get spills on it, be slept on by different people if beds were rotated, or be used as a makeshift backrest during breaks. This is where the quality of its construction and stuffing would be tested. A well-made pillow would hold its shape and remain relatively comfortable. A poorly made one might quickly become lumpy or flatten out. Our quirky tidbit for this stage: despite the functional nature of their quarters, even palace servants had some personal belongings. Their beds might be simple, but a decent pillow was a small comfort in a demanding life. It provided a bit of personal space, a familiar object in a shared, often anonymous living situation. Imagine the comfort derived from resting your head on something soft after a long day of physical labor. Historians still argue about the social hierarchy and living conditions within the various levels of palace service staff. Were some servants better housed or provisioned than others? Were there significant differences in the quality of furnishings provided based on rank, even within the servant class? While detailed records on servant quarters furnishings are rare, it's probable that distinctions existed, with higher-ranking servants enjoying slightly better amenities. Our pillow, being a basic cotton type, was likely destined for the more numerous, lower ranks. The life cycle of a pillow in the servant quarters would be relatively short compared to one used by someone of higher status. It would wear out faster due to constant use and less delicate handling. The fabric casing might fray, the stitches might loosen, the stuffing might become matted and compressed. When it reached a certain point of disrepair, it would be replaced either with a new pillow from the storeroom or perhaps with a repurposed older pillow from a higher status area that was being downgraded. Our pillow's time in this busy, functional environment is a period of steady, unspectacular service. It's not witnessing grand events, it's part of the quiet, unseen machinery of the palace. Its experiences are limited to the routines of its user, waking up, making the bed, or not, returning at night. It feels the weight of a tired head, the warmth of a sleeping body, the occasional punch to fluff it up. It's a silent observer of the less glamorous side of palace life, the exhaustion, the camaraderie, the simple existence of those who served. This is where our pillow earns its keep, providing basic, much-needed comfort in a world that wasn't always comfortable. This is the lowest rung, and its time here, though perhaps short in the grand scheme of the palace, is a significant chapter in its quiet, boring history. Our cotton pillow has completed its initial tour of duty in the palace servant quarters. It's felt the weight of weary heads and witnessed the less glamorous, though essential, routines of daily palace life. As items wear out or are replaced, there's often a chain of redistribution in large institutions. A new pillow goes to the highest priority need, and the slightly less new but still usable pillow might be moved elsewhere. In the hierarchical world of the Ottoman palace, items often moved down the status ladder as they aged or newer versions became available. So, let's imagine our pillow, maybe still in decent shape despite its use, being moved from the servant quarters. Its next stop up the ladder, though still far from the Sultan's inner sanctum, could be the chambers of lower or mid-level officials. These might be scribes in the Divan-i-Humayun, the imperial council, administrators in one of the many palace departments, or officers in the Janissary Corps or other palace guards who held a degree of status. These individuals had more comfortable and private quarters than the general servants, but they were still far from the pinnacle of luxury. Their chambers might be small apartments or private rooms within larger buildings in the palace complex. Here, our pillow would likely find itself on a slightly more elevated bed or perhaps on a divan, a raised platform covered with cushions and rugs used for seating during the day and sometimes sleeping at night. It's a step up in the world. The environment is likely cleaner, quieter, and less crowded than the servant quarters. The person using the pillow is someone with a degree of authority, someone involved, however tangentially, in the administrative or military functions of the palace. Mainstream historical fact number 11, the Ottoman administrative system relied on a large bureaucracy of scribes, clerks, and officials who managed the day-to-day operations of the empire. Many of these officials resided within the palace complex or in close proximity, and their living quarters reflected their rank and importance within the hierarchy. Furnishing these quarters required a significant supply of items like pillows and cushions. Life in these chambers followed a different rhythm than in the servant quarters. There were still duties and schedules, but perhaps more centered around paperwork, meetings, and formal obligations. Our pillow would witness quiet hours spent reading or writing by lamplight, hushed conversations about palace politics or administrative matters, and the structured routines of someone with responsibilities. The sleep it supported might be less physically exhausted and perhaps more mentally weary. The pillow here would experience a different kind of wear. Less rough handling, perhaps, but still constant use. It might be arranged neatly on the divan during the day, part of the room's decor before being used for sleep at night. It might even have a simple, removable cover placed over its plain cotton casing, adding a layer of protection and perhaps a touch of modest decoration. This is our quirky tidbit. Even relatively simple pillows might be given removable covers made of slightly better fabric to match the decor or extend the life of the pillow itself. These covers could be changed and washed, which was far easier than cleaning the entire pillow. Historians still argue about the material culture of the Ottoman middle ranks. While we have inventories and descriptions for the truly wealthy and the very basic for the poor, documenting the precise furnishings and possessions of mid-level officials and merchants is harder. What constituted a comfortable, appropriate living space for someone of this status? How much luxury was acceptable or typical? Was a well-stuffed cotton pillow the standard, or did some aspire to wool or even feather pillows? It's a fascinating, quiet debate about the nuances of status reflected in everyday objects. Our pillow, in these quarters, is a step closer to the center of power, but still on the periphery. It might overhear snippets of conversations related to important palace affairs, but it's not in the rooms where decisions are made. It's in the support structure, the bureaucratic backbone. Its life is one of quiet service to someone who serves someone else. It feels the impression of a head that contains information, worries, and plans related to the running of a vast empire, even if those are low-level plans. Its lifespan here might be longer than in the servant quarters due to less strenuous use, but it would still eventually show signs of age. The fabric might fade or thin, the stuffing might compact slightly. When it was eventually replaced by a newer pillow, its journey might continue downwards in the hierarchy, perhaps back to the servant quarters or even leaving the palace altogether for use in associated buildings or given to retiring staff. This stage in the pillow's life represents a quiet ascent, a move into a slightly more refined, slightly less physically demanding environment. It's witnessed a bit more privacy, a bit more intellectual activity, even if it was just paperwork, and perhaps been treated with a bit more care. It's seen a different facet of palace life, one of administration and lower-level authority. And this gentle shift in environment is just another slow, predictable step in its boring, calming history. Our resilient cotton pillow has moved up a notch in the palace hierarchy, graduating from the busy servant quarters to the slightly quieter, more private chambers of a mid-level official. But its journey within the palace's complex social geography might take another turn, perhaps towards one of the most unique and fascinating sections, the harem. The harem, often sensationalized in Western accounts, was fundamentally the private living quarters of the Sultan, his mother, the Valat Sultan, his consorts, Khadimler, his many children, and a vast retinue of female servants, eunuchs, and tutors. It was a world unto itself within the palace, with its own strict hierarchy, rules, and daily rhythms. Access was highly restricted. For our humble pillow to enter the harem, it would need to be specifically designated for use within its walls. This would happen through the same procurement process, but goods destined for the harem were often handled with extra care and security. Imagine our pillow being carried through internal palace passages towards the harem gates. These gates were guarded by eunuchs, who controlled access. Once inside, the atmosphere would change. While still bustling, it was a predominantly female world, filled with the sounds of women's voices, children playing, and the movement of many feet along tiled floors. The harem was a place of complex social dynamics, alliances, rivalries, and boredom. Pillows and cushions were absolutely central to the furnishings of the harem. Life here involved a lot of sitting and lounging on divans and floor cushions. Chambers ranged from relatively simple rooms for servants to incredibly luxurious apartments for the Valat Sultan and the chief consorts. Our cotton pillow, being a basic utility item, wouldn't end up in the most opulent of these, but it could certainly find a place in the chambers of a concubine of lower rank, a senior servant, or perhaps in the shared living areas within the harem complex. Mainstream historical fact number 12. The Ottoman harem was a large, structured community with a strict internal hierarchy, not just a place of leisure. While it was the center of the imperial family's private life and the setting for both domesticity and political intrigue, it also housed hundreds of women and eunuchs whose lives were governed by rules and service. Pillows were essential furnishings throughout this complex environment. In the harem, our pillow would experience a different kind of use and witness a different set of interactions. It would be used for lounging on divans during the day, supporting backs and elbows as women talked, read, or did needlework. At night, it would serve its traditional purpose as a headrest. It would feel the weight of women's heads, perhaps adorned with elaborate hairstyles or simple head coverings. It might witness moments of quiet contemplation, hushed secrets, or lively gossip. The visual environment would be richer than the servant quarters or administrative offices. Even simpler rooms in the harem were likely adorned with colorful textiles, rugs, and wall hangings. Our plain cotton pillow might be covered with a decorative cushion cover made of patterned silk or embroidered fabric, transforming its appearance entirely. This is our quirky tidbit. The harem was a major consumer of fine textiles and decorative arts, and even basic furnishings like pillows were often elevated visually through the use of luxurious covers. The plain cotton inside was just the functional core. Historians still argue about the degree of agency and influence women within the harem possessed. While often depicted as confined figures, women like the Valat Sultan and powerful consorts wielded significant power and influence over the Sultan and palace affairs. Did the humble objects in their environment, like pillows, absorb any of the tension, ambition, or frustration of their occupants? Unlikely. But it's interesting to consider the contrast between the material simplicity of our pillow and the complex human dramas unfolding around it. Our pillow in the harem would be part of a world that was simultaneously luxurious and restrictive. It would witness the daily routines of women who lived in comfort but under constant surveillance and according to strict protocols. It would feel the physical presence of individuals whose lives were defined by their relationship to the Sultan and the internal power struggles of the harem hierarchy. It might be a silent witness to moments of boredom, intimacy, or quiet despair. Compared to the rough and tumble of the servant quarters, a pillow in the harem might be treated with more care, especially if it had a nice cover. However, with potentially more leisure time and varied activities occurring on the divans, it might also be subjected to different stresses, used as a prop during storytelling, stacked and rearranged frequently, or perhaps even occasionally thrown in a fit of pique, though hopefully not too often. When its time in a particular harem chamber came to an end, perhaps due to wear, or the occupant moving to different quarters, or being replaced by a newer, plumper pillow, its fate would again be determined by the palace's internal redistribution system. It might be moved to a less important part of the harem, sent to other palace buildings, or finally retired. But its time in the harem, however brief or extended, would represent a chapter spent in a truly unique, fascinating, and intensely human environment within the palace walls. It felt the rhythms of private life at the heart of the empire, albeit filtered through layers of hierarchy and restriction. And that quiet observation is just another slow beat in our pillow-soporific story. Our diligent cotton pillow has served in the servant quarters, graced the divan of a mid-level official, and perhaps even experienced the unique atmosphere of the harem. It's slowly, almost imperceptibly, moving through the physical and social landscape of the Ottoman palace. Now, let's imagine a scenario where our pillow reaches an even higher level of proximity to power. Not the Sultan's private sleeping quarters just yet, but a space where significant individuals gather and important matters are discussed, an antechamber to an audience chamber. Audience chambers in the Topkapi Palace, like the Imperial Council Hall, Divan-i Humayun, or the Throne Room, Arz-o-Dasi, were places of formal ceremony and governance. Before being granted an audience with the Sultan or entering the council sessions, officials, foreign ambassadors, and petitioners would wait in antechambers. These waiting rooms were furnished appropriately, comfortable enough for dignitaries, but perhaps not as lavish as the Sultan's private rooms. They were designed to impress, but also to serve a practical function. Our pillow could find itself in such an antechamber. Placed on a divan or large floor cushions around the edges of the room, it would be part of the formal seating arrangement. Here, its primary use would shift from being a headrest for sleep to a support for sitting, propping up backs, cushioning elbows, or serving as a comfortable base on large floor cushions. It would be treated with more care in this setting. These were public-facing rooms, even if only to a select group of people. Imagine our pillow witnessing the arrival and departure of important figures. Viziers in their formal robes, foreign ambassadors in sometimes outlandish, to Ottoman eyes, attire, military commanders, religious scholars. People would sit near our pillow, perhaps adjusting it for comfort, as they waited, rehearsing their speeches, discussing strategy in low tones, or observing the other people present. The air would be thick with anticipation, formality, and perhaps a bit of nervous energy. Mainstream historical fact number 13, antechambers and waiting areas were crucial spaces in Ottoman palace protocol. They facilitated the formal presentation of individuals to the Sultan or the Imperial Council and were spaces where last-minute discussions or observations took place before entering the main audience or council chambers. Furnishings in these areas needed to be comfortable and project an image of quiet dignity. Our pillow, silent and still, would be privy to hushed conversations, snippets of political maneuvering, diplomatic niceties exchanged, discussions of military campaigns, or legal judgments. It wouldn't understand the words, of course, but it would feel the weight of the people engaged in these significant exchanges. It's a static observer of dynamic human interaction at a high level. Our quirky tidbit, foreign ambassadors waiting in these antechambers were often keenly observing every detail of the surroundings, trying to gauge the power and wealth of the Ottoman state. A well-furnished antechamber, even with seemingly simple things like comfortable, high-quality cushions, contributed to the overall impression the palace wanted to make. So, our pillow, even if plain cotton inside, was part of a carefully curated environment intended to project imperial grandeur and stability. Historians still argue about the precise layout and furnishing of various antechambers within Topkapi Palace over different periods. As the palace evolved and different areas were used for different purposes, the function and decor of these transitional spaces changed. Were certain antechambers reserved for specific types of visitors? Did the quality of furnishings vary significantly between them? Reconstructing the exact details based on surviving records and architectural evidence is an ongoing scholarly puzzle. The pillow in this setting would likely have a high-quality cover, perhaps made of silk or velvet, embroidered with patterns or motifs appropriate for the palace. This cover would be the visible part, the part that contributed to the room's aesthetic. The plain cotton casing and stuffing inside would remain hidden, the functional core beneath the decorative exterior. This highlights the Ottoman emphasis on surfaces and presentations, especially in public-facing areas. Life in the antechamber for our pillow is less about constant physical use like sleeping and more about intermittent, formal support for sitting. It would be plumped and arranged by palace staff, kept clean, and generally treated with respect due to its location. It would be part of the background, a piece of the furniture, but a piece that absorbed the subtle tensions and high-stakes interactions of palace politics. This stage represents the closest our pillow gets to the nerve center of the empire without entering the most private imperial spaces. It's felt the weight of individuals who shaped history, heard, though not understood, discussions that affected millions, and been part of the visual theater of imperial power. Its existence remains passive, but its location places it in proximity to truly significant events. It's a silent witness in a room filled with hushed importance. This proximity to power, even in a waiting room, adds a layer of quiet significance to our pillow's otherwise mundane existence. And this subtle shift in atmosphere, from domestic to political, might just lull you further into sleep. Our cotton pillow has had a varied career within the Ottoman palace walls. From the basic needs of the servant quarters, to the slightly more refined environment of an official's room, and even brushing shoulders, or rather, supporting the backsides, of dignitaries in an antechamber. But time, as it does for all things, marches on, and even a humble cotton pillow is not immune to its effects. The fabric of the casing, no matter how sturdy, would start to show wear. Perhaps the color, originally a natural off-white, has faded or yellowed with age and exposure to light. The fibers of the cotton stuffing, after countless hours of bearing weight and being compressed, would begin to mat and lose their resilience. The pillow would start to feel less plump, perhaps a bit lumpy or flat. The seams, meticulously hand-stitched, might show signs of strain or minor fraying. This is the reality of everyday objects, they age. In the palace, where appearance and function were both important, items showing significant wear would eventually be replaced. Our pillow, which might have started its palace life in a more prominent location, perhaps not the absolute top tier, but maybe an official's room, would, as it aged, likely be relegated to less important areas. Imagine it being swapped out for a newer, plumper pillow in the antechamber or official's room. It wouldn't be discarded immediately. Instead, it would follow that downward path we discussed earlier. It might be moved to a less formal waiting area, then perhaps back to the servant quarters where comfort standards were lower and durability was more important than appearance. It could end up in a utility area, a guard post, or even storerooms for rarely used sections of the palace. Mainstream historical fact number 14. Resource management in large historical institutions like the Ottoman palace often involved repurposing or redistributing items as they aged or were replaced by newer ones. Textiles, in particular, were valuable and would be used for as long as possible, moving down the hierarchy of use before being discarded or used for rags. Our aging pillow is part of this cycle of decay and redistribution. Its final years within the active life of the palace would be spent in functional obscurity. It might serve a guard sleeping on a shift, a servant taking a brief rest, or simply sit unused in a corner of a storage area for old furnishings. It would carry the accumulated history of its use, the faint impressions of past users, the subtle marks of age. It has fulfilled its primary purpose and is now entering a phase of quiet decline. Our quirky tidbit for this stage, even worn-out textiles in the Ottoman period, including cotton from old pillows, were often repurposed. They might be used for patching, turned into cleaning cloths, or even shredded and used for low-grade stuffing or insulation. Very little was wasted, reflecting an economy where resources were more precious and labor was cheaper than materials. So, our pillow's component parts might have a further life even after its form as a pillow is gone. Historians still argue about the frequency of replacement for palace furnishings. Was there a regular schedule for updating items, or were things replaced only when they were visibly worn out or when funds were readily available? Did the status of the occupant dictate how quickly their furnishings were refreshed? Records on the disposal or repurposing of mundane items like old pillows are understandably scarce, making it difficult to precisely track their final fate or estimate their typical lifespan within the palace. Our pillow, now perhaps a bit saggy, with faded fabric and compacted stuffing, is a tangible representation of time passing within the palace walls. It has witnessed changes in personnel, perhaps even different sultans or significant events, all while quietly supporting the weight placed upon it. It has served its purpose, providing comfort and support, and is now slowly reaching the end of its useful life as a pillow. It sits somewhere less important, less visible. The hustle and bustle of the central palace are distant. Its world has shrunk to a small corner, a modest room, or a dusty shelf. It's not witnessing history anymore, it's becoming history, a quiet artifact of daily life slowly fading into disuse. This decline is not dramatic, but gradual, mirroring the slow, persistent nature of its entire existence. It is preparing for its eventual exit from the active scene, moving towards its final disposition, whatever that may be. Its story isn't quite over, but this chapter is about winding down, a slow fade towards the end. Our humble cotton pillow, having served its time in various corners of the vast Ottoman palace, reached the inevitable end of its useful life as a comfort item. Its fabric is tired, its stuffing compacted. It's been moved, demoted, and now occupies a space far from the gilded halls and important meetings. What becomes of such an object in a place as immense and complex as Topkapi? Its fate isn't recorded in any grand chronicle, of course. Its departure from the active life of the palace, like its arrival and tenure, was likely mundane, quiet, and entirely unspectacular. There were a few possible paths for our aging pillow. One was simply being discarded. But discarding wasn't always a simple matter of throwing something in the bin in the pre-industrial world, especially within a place as security-conscious and resource-aware as the palace. Waste management wasn't like municipal trash collection today. It was often about minimizing waste by reusing everything possible. If our pillow was truly beyond repair or repurposing, perhaps infested, or the fabric completely disintegrating, it might be taken to a designated waste area outside the main palace buildings. Imagine it unceremoniously tossed onto a pile of other refuse, exposed to the elements, its fibers slowly breaking down, returning to the earth from which they sprang millennia ago. A rather ignominious end after dwelling within imperial walls. Another, perhaps more likely, fate was repurposing. We touched on this briefly, but let's consider it more. The cotton stuffing could be removed from the worn casing. The casing itself, if the fabric was still somewhat intact, could be cut up and used as rags for cleaning. Given the size of the palace and its constant need for cleaning, this was a practical and common use for old textiles. Imagine bits of our pillow casing wiping down floors or polishing furniture. It's a functional second life, albeit a less glamorous one. The cotton stuffing, if still reasonably clean, could be used as lower-grade stuffing for other items, perhaps cheap cushions used in stables or utility areas, or even mixed with other materials for mattress filling elsewhere in the city. Or, as our quirky tidbit mentioned, it could be shredded down entirely and used for insulation in walls or roofs, or even mixed with clay for building materials in less important structures. Its soft fibers, having provided comfort, could end up providing structural support or warmth in a different form. It's a quiet transformation, a recycling process driven by necessity. Mainstream historical fact number 15, recycling and repurposing of materials, particularly textiles, were common and essential practices in pre-industrial societies, including the Ottoman Empire. Objects were used until they were completely worn out, and their components were often given new lives in different forms rather than being simply discarded as modern disposable culture often allows. Our pillow's potential afterlife as rags or insulation is a testament to this resourcefulness. A third possibility, perhaps the quietest of all, is that our pillow was simply forgotten. Moved to a deep storeroom, tucked away in a corner with other old and used furnishings, it might have simply remained there, undisturbed, for decades or even centuries. Imagine it lying under layers of dust sheets, on a high shelf in a rarely accessed part of the palace complex, slowly decaying in the darkness. This isn't a dramatic end, but a fade into historical obscurity, waiting patiently for an archaeologist centuries later to perhaps uncover it and puzzle over its simple existence. Historians still argue about the volume and nature of waste generated by the Ottoman palace. While we know recycling was common, the sheer scale of the palace population and its consumption must have resulted in significant amounts of refuse. How was this managed? Were there specific sites for dumping? How much material was truly recycled versus simply discarded? Piecing together the details of palace waste management and the final disposition of everyday objects like worn pillows requires careful analysis of scattered archaeological finds and limited written sources. It's a subject less studied than diplomacy or military campaigns, but just as crucial to understanding the material reality of palace life. So, the final chapter for our cotton pillow is one of quiet dissolution. Whether it was torn into rags, scattered as insulation, or simply left to crumble in a forgotten storeroom, its time as a pillow serving the residents of the Ottoman court has ended. It felt the sun on its original plant, endured dusty caravan trails and sea voyages, experienced the rhythmic creation in a workshop, navigated the formal entry into the palace, and provided simple comfort at various levels of the hierarchy. It witnessed, passively, the slow, boring, persistent rhythm of palace life. Its journey, devoid of heroes or villains, triumphs or tragedies, is complete. It's a story of material transformation, human labor, vast distances, and the quiet, unseen life of an everyday object in an extraordinary setting. A story as soft as cotton itself, unfolding at a pace designed to bore you into peaceful oblivion. As you lie there now, feeling the gentle pressure of your own pillow, consider its anonymous history, its own journey from field to fabric to furnishing. It's a connection to the past, however mundane. It's a reminder that history isn't just about kings and battles, but about the countless objects and people who made up the texture of daily life, even within the walls of power. The sounds of the palace fade now, the distant echoes of footsteps on marble floors, the soft rustle of silk, the quiet murmurs of a forgotten conversation, the gentle thrumming of a cotton bough from a long-gone workshop. The images soften, the bright sun on a distant cotton field, the swaying motion of a camel, the patient hands of a seamstress, the silent stacking of pillows in a dim storeroom. Everything is slowing down, becoming fainter, like the slow unraveling of cotton fibers returning to dust. There's nothing left to follow now. The journey is over, the pillow rests, and so can you.